If I could begin with the introduction of Mr. Anant Goenka. So our next speaker is the scion of an illustrious media house set up by a member of the Constituent Assembly of India, Sri Ramnath Goenka ji, apologies, way back in 1932, the Indian Express. He was a fearless editor and freedom fighter who is remembered for his fierce opposition to former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi during the days of the emergency. 90 years later, they are still the hallmark of the group's investigative and fearless journalism. Anant Goenka is the executive director of the Indian Express Group, a fully hands-on professional who is dynamically taking the legacy forward, steering the expansion of the Express's digital business in tune with the group's enduring values of fairness, accuracy, and courage. The Indian Express Group is one of the world's largest digital news media groups with over 200 million unique users a month in 7 languages. Its investigative journalism expose resulted in the government recovering hundreds of crores, if not thousands, while Mr. Goenka personally feels strongly about societal issues, including terrorism, drugs, and future of media in a polarized climate. He is as comfortable being the host at the Express Adda or interviewing Amir Khan. Recognized and awarded by global media as the young influential leaders of the future, Mr. Goenka finds the time to enjoy motorsports, listen to jazz, and accompany his young son to Shishu Vihar, a parental toddler grassroots activity of Chinmaya mission. And by his own admission, he is a terrible drummer, but one who likes to march to his own beat. So we all look forward to hearing your views on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Mr. Goenka. I'd invite Mr. Pankaj Vakil, Secretary, Chinmaya Mission Prakash Zone, to welcome Mr. Anant Goenka. Invite Mr. Goenka to address us.
Very good afternoon to everybody. I'm getting towards lunchtime, so I won't take too much time. I want to start by saying, Swamiji, Namaskar, Pranam. I'm so humbled and I'm feeling very unqualified to speak in front of him. I must say, I went to him once. I went to Swami Satmanand once. I've been going for his Gita lectures, I think, for 2-3 years. I think just before COVID. So I was equipped for COVID because I was going there every Sunday. No, I'm very serious. I genuinely feel that. I went to him once. There was something in the news that was going around for almost a week. I don't know how many of you remember this. It was a video of a man, a young guy in Bangalore. He was seen as playing with this very friendly dog. And he kind of was, he took this dog and just threw the dog from the top of the terrace of this building. This guy, show of hands, how many of you remember this video? Yeah? He just took the dog and kind of threw it. And this dog was very happy and kind of, kept smiling and then suddenly just wondered what happened to it, and it just kind of, went down and went maybe 3 or 4 or maybe 5 stories. I went to Swamiji and I said, Swamiji, I want to ask you, what drives man to do something so sadistic? You're taking an innocent animal who's just so happy to be with you, and just, cause that kind of pain. What goes on in the psyche of a man to do something like that? And I remember what Swamiji said to me then, and I'm talking about, it must have been at least 5 to 6 years ago. And Swamiji said, Anant, you've got the act wrong. His act wasn't to throw a dog off the top of a building. His act was to be videoed with a smile throwing the dog off the top of the building. So he brought out a perspective. He said, it is our need for attention. It was his need for attention that made him do that. It was his need for social media virality, maybe, that made him do that. It was, if there was no video camera there, if there was no phone recording him, he wouldn't have been throwing that dog off the roof. I thought that was so, incredibly perceptive. And this is something, at that time, when nobody really understood, when social media wasn't at what it is today, it was such a... So I wanted to say, that's the kind of, wisdom we have with us here. And so I'm very humbled to be here. It really made me think, right? Each one of us saw that video, and it was outrage all over the country. And each one of us saw that video and said, what is the police doing? You know, we said, what are the animal welfare outfits doing? You know, we spoke about the need for better education. All absolutely true. But none of us pause to reflect and think about what are we doing that's driving a person to be as mad as want to video himself throwing a dog off a roof, right? And, you know, I think this really is the problem that I think we have and media also has. I think media, we're always, and Express is, I think, no exception. I think for too long, we've been publishing for 90 years now, I think for too long, we have just been complaining. You know, something goes wrong, that person at fault, this person at fault. It's absolutely true. We have to find people at fault. We have to hold the people in power to account. And that's a big part of our job. We take it very seriously. But, you know, media is essentially a reflection of society. You know, it's been said that a good newspaper is a nation having a conversation with itself. So we are reflecting what society is. And society doesn't look inwards. You know, I think this example really showed to me where I think media kind of has a long way to go. I can just pause here and ask all of you, you know, what do you think, and I want to hear, what do you think is the one thing that makes India special? I'm actually asking, I want to hear some responses, please. Diversity? Culture? Tolerance? Compassion? Borrowers? Followers? Celebrations, okay. Seekers? Oh, this is fantastic. I mean, these are the kind of answers I should have expected from an audience with Chinmaya and board, but you know, we should all have something. You know, I hope that all of us don't just say, "Sare jahan se acha Hindustan hamara," because we were taught that in school. Because if you're saying that, you're coming out of ego. Because I'm born here, so it's the best country in the world. You should have some. You should put some mind to everybody in every country. I think needs to think about why they think their country is the best, and they should feel good for their space. I think India is special because, as somebody was saying, seekers. I think we're a very spiritually in tune place. You know, I think we're a country of seekers. That's somebody had mentioned that, and I'm taking your answer. And I've got many examples to show why that is. But before I play the example, can I ask to play that video now that we had queued up, that short video? You know, my views were country of seekers. I want you to hear what William Dalrymple told me once. This is about, I think, about 4 years ago. If you can please play that video, yeah. Is the audio?
I mean, the right-wing view of the past is that there was a prime past, which was, you know, the best time India ever had. It was some time in the past. What time in the past was India's prime?
It's a really difficult Q&A. I must apologize.
Well, I mean, I think obviously in the Hindutva version of events, the golden age was ancient India when, you know, internet and plastic surgery and so on all came out, and the atomic bomb and the Air Force and the moon mission all happened long before Ashoka. But
No, honestly, your study of Indian history, when do you think India was at its prime best, where there was general harmony around, there was economic prosperity?
So, what is true, and Hindutva myths apart, is that this country had an extraordinary millennium or 800 years, between about 400 and 1200, when, and this I think in a sense hasn't been written enough, you have the whole of Southeast Asia adopting Sanskrit, Hindu names. You have the churning of the ocean on the back wall of Angkor Wat. You have the Ramayana passing all the way down to Java and Malaysia. And all the kings between, Singapura and Gandhara, both Sanskrit names. As far as Kandahar is Gandhara, and Singapura is a Sanskrit name. Between those two poles, you have this huge Sanskrit cosmopolis, which Sheldon Pollock has written so well about, which is converted to Indian ways through Indian soft power rather than through conquest. Ditto the whole spread of Buddhism up through Afghanistan into eastern China. And what I think has happened is that the two stories, which are one civilizational story of India at its most brilliant, beaming out ideas of kingship, plays, technology, ways of living, the Sanskrit language. This whole story gets divided into two different departments. You get the story of the spread of Buddhism, which is normally told as a Buddhist story connected with the story of the Silk Road. And then you get the story of the Sanskritization of Southeast Asia as something separate, which is studied in a different university department, or different, and the bits are put in a different bit of the museum, because Hindu and Buddhist. In fact, it's one story of India commanding the imagination of Asia during this period, and from the worship of Durga in Ghazni, through to images of Shiva in Central Asian frescoes, through to the churning of the ocean in Angkor Wat. This is this period when India's soft power, without any military means, and when Huan Sang sets off from China, he says, the country in the world most admired by educated people is India. And in a sense, this is what people should be being proud of. It's an extraordinary period.
When I got back, I studied in Los Angeles for 6 years. One of the first things I did when I got back was I started just traveling a lot around India. And I drove from Srinagar to Ladakh, stayed overnight in Dras. I went to the Kargil War Memorial and I met this very, clearly very decorated army man. And I asked him, I said, what gives you that strength and that power to say that you're going to sacrifice your life for the country if it needs? And he said, actually, that's very easy. To say I'm sacrificing my life for my country actually is not that difficult. What's very difficult is saying that I'm going to kill for my country, that I'm going to take somebody else's life for my country. I thought it was such a profound thing to say, and I really feel this is one of the kind of things that, you probably will only hear in India, I felt very passionately about the attacks that happened in Mumbai, 26/11 attacks. I lost some family. Some of you, I'm sure many of you from Mumbai are also familiar. So we at the Express took on a job of going to interview as many survivors as we could. And over the course of 3 to 4 years, we interviewed over 100 survivors of the attacks. These are people who've lost their own kids, their parents, their spouses. Not one person spoke of a lust for blood. Not one person spoke for revenge. Each one spoke about unity, brotherhood, humanity. Some people spoke, the language of forgiveness. In studying 26/11, I don't know how many of you are familiar, there was a Harvard professor who wrote a case study about how the Taj employees behaved. There were 600 Taj employees on the spot at Taj. Not one of them was asked to risk their own lives to save the lives of other of their guests, but each one of them did. Not one of them fled. Each one of them helped guests and went back to help other guests. They had no reason to do that. These are all, I think, examples I think are very kind of unique. And I think this is, I think because we're a country of seekers, I think, and I'm reaching, but this is my sort of view of India. I think this is what makes India very special and different. If I can ask you quickly now, the next piece is, what do you think is the biggest problem of our times? If I can just get a sense and responses. If I were to say, what is that one thing you think is our time's biggest problem? Please. Attention. Passing the buck. Perfect. Not believing in yourself. Super. Green, climate change is what I get very often when I ask this question. Copying the West, jungle society. And passiveness, okay. So I think these are all great answers, but my answer is polarization, right? And we heard earlier also, I think what you're seeing is that the polarization is so bad, especially when you see in the US, it is unrecognizable, that country from 10 years ago. The completely fractured society. And you know, if you visited in the last, and I think Sudhanshu was mentioning it before, if you talk to somebody who watches Fox News and you talk to somebody who watches CNN, you will not believe they're from the same country. It is such a polarized space. And you know, people blame politicians. Of course, politicians are to blame, but politicians need to get you to vote. Politicians need to get you to vote by making you feel very passionately about something. So they'll keep provoking you to think and to feel. And that's why you go and vote. But what does media do? Media is playing into that, right? As I'm showing with examples. And this is not in India, this is not US, this is around the world. This is a you spin the globe and point wherever it lands, you'll say this is happening around the world. And so how do you fix polarization? You start to police media. Your immediate instinct is let's police media. Let's police free speech, right? Let's appoint someone to say what's offensive, what isn't, because everybody's getting offended by what somebody else is saying. So let's police it. Let's stop offending people. And I think this is the trap that Western world is making, and we are sort of following it. But I don't think it will work in India. I'm convinced that India will be the example of how the media will help defeat polarization. You know, we are a nation that has been talking to the entire world about being one family. We are professing that we have one common future. When you think of the world as one family, when you disagree in your own family, you don't villainize the person you're disagreeing with. You know, you get over that disagreement quite fast because wo apnapan lagta hai. You feel, and there's no English word for apnapan, I don't think. You know, that there is a feeling of understanding and empathy with the person you're disagreeing with. So you don't villainize, you don't otherize, and you disagree with empathy. And I'll tell you why I am convinced, right? I think at the Express, we have been doing what other media companies haven't been doing. I'll give you a small example. We're one of the few news organizations left with a committed, dedicated investigations team. We investigate, and it's expensive. It's an expensive thing to do. Our most recent investigation, something that I'm very proud of, we had investigated that over 77 antiques from India were smuggled outside of the country. We did this investigation, and the smuggler is sitting in jail in Chennai. We've done this investigation. 2 weeks later, the Metropolitan Museum in New York has committed to returning 15 antiques back to India. This happened just 2 weeks ago, right? We investigated, I think it was mentioned in the bio, but we investigated the Panama Papers, all the offshore accounts that have been illegal. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 20,000 crore rupees of illegal black money that the Indian government has discovered, parked in offshore accounts illegally, just by reading the Indian Express. Just by reading the Indian Express and sending notices to all the names published, they have recovered 20,000 crores. And it doesn't have to be wide-reaching, right? We had an example now. There was a bureaucrat in Delhi. I still shudder to understand how this happens, but there was a bureaucrat in Delhi who had shut down a stadium a few hours earlier so he could walk his dog. It took us 3 months to get that story because we had photographers. There were 4 teams training in that stadium who had to stop training early just so this guy could walk his dog. We put the story out immediately, obviously, transferred, etc., and stadium was open. And most importantly, these teams would come back and start training till however late they wanted to. But I'll tell you so we've been doing all of this, and it's been helping. I think we're one of the few news companies, we're one of the few English newspapers in India, possibly the only one whose print circulation in the year 2023, print circulation has grown post-COVID than it was pre-COVID. English newspaper. And our digital subscription also has been a very exciting journey, and I've been very happy to hear. So to some degree, I was kind of concerned that India too is forgetting the value of free speech. I'm running, I don't know how much time I've got, but I'll just quickly share, there are 2 people who shaped my understanding of nationalism, my understanding of patriotism, my understanding of India. One was Anantji, who was very close to my grandfather. Whenever he came to Mumbai, he lived at home. A quick show of hands, who all are familiar with Anantji? Yes, some of them. So, and the other was Rajmata of Gwalior. She was also very close to Anantji, one of the founders of the Janata Party and the Jan Sangh at that time, and she stayed at home when she would come to Mumbai. So these two people were, grandparent figures in my life who I spent a lot of time with. And, Nanaji Deshmukh would talk to me about how my grandfather and him threw homemade bombs at British supply trains when they were fighting for freedom. Naniji did, all kinds of similar things. She was jailed. She spoke to me about how when she was in jail, she would get rotis. She had to take out the ants and eat the rotis. She was a queen, and, she sort of, and I've seen all this very closely. And so I always wondered that, when we were a starving country, we were apparently illiterate in 42 and 30s onwards. We were putting our lives on line for our freedoms. Why today do I see that people are wanting to move to Dubai and Singapore and not fighting for freedoms like they were in 42, when now we are much more sort of, stable, we've more prosperity. So, it would bother me. But I think if we're looking at some of the successes that have worked, that have cut across the polarized groups, I think we have a lot to be grateful for. I think a lot that India is doing and kind of is continuing to think in terms of, I am very confident that Indian media will actually be the one that will show that we live this, that the world is one and the future is the same, that we all live together. And I think we probably do this with a quiet cultural confidence. There is, those of you who visited America, there's a big statue of Lincoln in Washington, D.C., which you've all probably seen photographs of. And behind that statue it's written, "In this temple, as in the hearts of people for whom he saved through union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." So the President of the United States, he's got this big statue and it's got this message behind, and in front is a much longer message. The King of UK at the same time was Edward VII. There is one main statue of his, somewhere, I don't know where in London, and below that statue it just says Edward VII. There's a certain cultural confidence they have in the UK that whoever comes here knows who Edward VII is. If they don't, they will find out, they'll ask, they'll talk, and they will understand and they'll feel whatever they need to feel and think about this particular gentleman who was the King of England at that particular time. A relatively newer country will profess and read and kind of sell its history and kind of keep reminding you and put it more in your face. I think we are the oldest, we are the most ancient, and we are the most confident sort of civilization. So I think if I have no doubts that we'll be the country that will make the difference. I'll just end by saying a small thing. This interview with William Dalrymple happened about 3 or 4 years ago. He called me a few days later and he said, "Listen, I want to thank you for that adda." I said, yeah, thank you. I assumed it was a polite conversation. And then he said, "No, I'm very serious, because that last question," this was the last question of the evening that I just played for you, "that last question you asked me, the response that it got, it's given me my next book." And so before I came here today, I called William and I asked him, I said, "Listen, you told me that those many years ago. How is that book coming along?" He said, "I just finished it." So thank you so much.
Yes, so we will now move on to the moderated question answer session. I've just been informed Navika ji had to excuse herself. She had an important story that seems to have come her way and that needed her attention, so she has excused herself. If I could invite both the panelists to join me on the dais while I introduce the moderator for this afternoon. The moderator for this afternoon is Mr. Vivek Krishnani, Vice President, Chinmaya Mission, Mumbai. Mr. Krishnani is also one of the youngest leaders in the film industry. He is presently the President and CEO of Films Business of IN10 Media Network, IN10, a company co-promoted by Mr. Anand Mahendra and Mr. Aditya Pitti. In his earlier avatars and senior positions, he has been associated with marquee film distribution companies like Sony Pictures and Fox Star Studios, marketing amazing content like Piku, Slumdog Millionaire, Life of Pi, and worked with the best of the best, Mr. Bachchan, and many modern day luminaries. Talk about a jackpot. I'd do him injustice by not going on with his accomplishments, but in the greater interest of time, my Vivek tells me that I need to hand it over to you. So I invite Vivek to the dais, and I also invite Vineet Parekh, Secretary Chinmaya Mission, Chinmaya Yuva Kendra, Mumbai, to welcome him with a token. It's part of the protocol. Come. Over to you, gentlemen.
I know this is Hari Om, everybody, and I know this is the worst time of the day when between the food for the tummy, we are now discussing food for thought, which is hopefully going to kind of keep us engaged for the next few minutes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so without wasting any further time, unfortunately, Navika ji couldn't be here. So, first question, I think, Mr. Goenka, to you. Oh, you're on the mic. I think there's a question that everybody currently is dealing with, that how do you deal with this menace called fake news? In this era of unbridled news, how do you differentiate good versus fake, where fake news could also mean agenda-oriented or convenient misinterpretation of facts?
Look, it's a, I think fake news is, I mean, you use the word good also in that question, so I'm a little confused about how to answer it now. It's either fake or it's not fake, right? That's the first piece we should be very clear about. And a lot of fake news, I think, fake news doesn't really come from media. Fake news comes from government. Fake news comes from people in power, generally, right? So my editor always says this, the biggest, what was the most, like the biggest fake news of this century was when Colin Powell stood up at the United Nations and said that they have discovered weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That is fake news said by a leader of state. The stronger the government, the more there is need to control the narrative. And you're seeing this around the world. I mean, I don't know how many of you have followed what's happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro at that time. It was extreme, it was just controlling content. You see, we have to be clear as audiences what is propaganda, what is something that you want to objectively learn and understand from. I'm a bit of a World War buff. I think a turning point for the Second World War, turning point was when the BBC began to broadcast in German language, right? You can call that propaganda. It's somebody's propaganda. So I think, so there's no real good answer, really. I think fake news is really up to us as audiences to ask the question. I think, after COVID, we fought the pandemic, we fought the infodemic. We fought the infodemic with people actually being very now, very curious as to who has said what. Earlier it was just like, ye kisi ne kaha hai. Something came on WhatsApp, you start forwarding around. People are now much more conscious who has sent it, which channel has said it, which newspaper has reported it, which reporter has reported it. So there is a certain evolution, which I think is the only way to really control fake news.
Thank you. Very, very apt expression of, how to handle this fake news, and the onus lies on us largely as well. Question to you, Prasanna. Thanks. You spoke about cancel culture, and we, like you rightly said, globally this cancel culture is very, very prevalent, and now it's kind of moving towards India, where people are attacking celebrities for voicing their thoughts. So there's a question from Chaitanya here saying, in the world of cancel culture, where people want to shut other people down, how does one bring a forum for discussion? How do you handle this, and how does one bring the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in it?
Beautiful. I love the question, and thanks for asking that, Chaitanya. I think the core of all this is, what happens when a certain problem doesn't get resolved in its origin, it will express itself in some other place, right? Like, so what happens is, when a lot of the issues have to be dealt at a political, social, real, on-the-ground level, and there, that work is very difficult to draw people's attention to. Even if you're a good politician, today, if I were to resolve a certain problem, at the ground level, it will take me maybe 10 years, 15 years. Whereas if I go ban a movie and give a speech about a movie, however irrelevant it is, I'll get attention. Because this whole system of getting, like you have TRPs, see, each industry has got its own, metrics, which we can use as excuse for going on in the way that we have always been going. I can quote the box office, you can quote the TRP. The politician can quote the 5-year system of getting votes. Everyone has got a reality of somewhere metrics, some business, right? So it's very easy for a politician today to actually, media, for celebrities to talk about movies or talk about, so then what you feel, like Obama rightfully pointed out about his own daughter, that previously protest meant at least you went out and did something. Today all you have to do is sit at your home and put one tweet. You know, for example, even if I'm talking about trans rights, you know, you see today the debate there is no debate in America, right? It's scary. Take J.K. Rowling, for example. For God's sake, the creator of Harry Potter, people are calling that she should not be credited for the HBO series, which she has created. And for what? She is telling that in her point of view, I am a woman, and let me have a word to say about this too. She is labeled a transphobe, she is cancelled. It's very dangerous. I might be cancelled for saying this. Luckily, I'm not as big as J.K. Rowling. But this is a reality. So what happens is, the core issue will never get resolved. What are we talking about? People who are trans must be given the same rights as people who are not trans, or whatever you call them. Like, we're all human beings. Again, it's a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but that issue is forgotten. Now it becomes about J.K. Rowling getting cancelled or not. So that's more interesting. It's very interesting for me to throw stones, beat up people, than to actually sitting and solving problems. Very boring here. So that's why that same thing, you know, becomes like a cancel culture. Now it has got into some other stage. It's got cancered. But people's careers are getting destroyed by some arbit. And it is very fascinating that most of this is done by the woke people who are calling themselves liberal, but they're actually mirroring the so-called right-wing dictators that they're actually behaving like those guys who are dictators. They're dictating who should be cancelled and who should not be. So I would say that as a filmmaker, does this worry me? Yes. But where I get worried, there are also I will get a story from it. So I'm very happy that as a filmmaker, I'll probably make a movie out of this. And there'll be enough people to support me on this. So that's one way of looking at it.
And they'll come and cancel you afterwards.
Let them cancel me afterwards, yeah.
Thanks, Prasanna. Yeah, absolutely. The cancel culture is like cancer culture. You know, it's kind of getting worse and worse. Question to you, Mr. Goenka. I'm sure you have your own views, as we've seen, you know, and your own leanings on issues which impact India. As the owner, how does one ensure that your personal views do not come in the way of a free-flowing democratic newsroom?
That's a great question, and I can't. If you know me, people who know me are shocked as to how many times the paper has taken editorial positions which strongly disagree with what I personally believe. You know, I have been raised to think of our purpose as very simple, really. Our purpose is to give the journalists the freedom to express their passions. And that means very often disagreeing with the editor, but the editor is the editor and I'm not. And that's, I think, the best way for an independent news organization to function is when there is a very clear distance between owner and editor. And I think we've been doing it. I can't say I don't think we're the norm. I certainly think that there are lots of owners who are either dictating editorial policy or they're not at all involved in editorial. So they're so uninvolved that the editor is not challenged and the editor is also kind of, running his own agenda, which eventually becomes a very commercially, questionable way of operating. So I can't answer that except to say that, the paper has taken positions which disagree with me personally, disagree with Dad, But more importantly, I have to, as a reader, feel like the paper has given my position a voice. It's taken a position which is disagreeing with it, but at least my position, which is the opposite position of the papers, at least there is enough space for it. And that's really where I think that there's a distinction between what we are doing and what I think most media is doing. It's very simple to just pick a side and keep hammering at it. It's commercially much easier, and it's just an easier thing to do. But what's much tougher is to have the same empathy for both sides and for all sides. And that's, I think, what the tough task is. I'll give you a small example. We had an express adda with the UPCM, Yogi Adityanath, a couple of years ago. I do some of the addas interviews. I enjoy doing them. I'm not Navika Kumar. I'm not on TV on primetime every day, and thank God I'm not. But I have never been trolled so much in a long time, right? I was like, how can you? And, from our some of our real loyal readers, who I was surprised got SMSs, how can you do this? And I said, listen, you've got to figure out why you don't want to hear from possibly the most powerful chief minister India has seen in many, many years. He is Merkel, Johnson, and he's Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, and who was the French guy back then? Macron. He has more votes than 3 state leaders combined. It is the largest state in the world, Uttar Pradesh, and he has won it. You have to be able to hear from him. I mean, you can troll me and ask him tough questions later, but to say that we should just not have him in the paper is a problem. So I think,
Thank you. Very refreshing to hear that. And a quick anecdote. I was talking to a common friend, Neeraj Ambani, and he was telling me that he was once in Arthur Road jail, where he was. Don't ask me why. I don't know, but he was there, and one of the jailers basically said that there was a story going on, and they said that I'm glad that Indian Express is here. At least 2 things will happen, because if it's the fact, they'll print it. If it's not, they won't. So I think that's great amounts, and kudos to all the credibility to Indian Express.
I hope everybody who's clapping is a subscriber, and if you aren't, become one now.
I think everybody's plugging their things here. So Danshu did. Anyway, great. Question to you, Prasanna. And this is related to another question that somebody's asked about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. In today's era, where countries like Japan, Korea, US are exporting their pop culture through anime, martial arts, pop songs, music, India, with its rich culture, history, and diverse population, has a vast pool of creative talent and produces a vast range of content. Now, despite its popularity, Indian content often struggles to gain significant global recognition and reach. How can we use the principles of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam to correct this?
Again, wonderful, beautiful questions. I think it's a lucky day for me. I'm getting all these lovely full tosses to. So this is again something that even Vivek, he's a studio head and I'm a filmmaker. So this is a conversation we also keep having. So I feel that, for example, Kantara, right? This movie Kantara, how many of you saw it? Yeah, right? So RRR. So we have enough number of filmmakers, we have enough talents. I think what we have to possibly do is that in terms of, we are making a shift from the traditional system of making movies, our studio way of making, the corporate studio method of making movies. No? What's happening? I see a very interesting trend. Like when I work in Chennai, when I work here in Mumbai, so a lot of the corporate studios, Hindi nobody speaks. So you'll find a lot of the people who are in the creative teams and all, they don't speak Hindi. So, like for example, in his journey or any of the people who are veterans, right? They would have gone through theaters, they would have gone through on the ground, right? And then come up. So a lot of the younger people who are in, wanting to get into films, right? Are actually not in the big cities. All the great filmmakers are actually possibly not only in Mumbai or only there because they can't survive. I used to say Chennai is a beautiful city to be a struggling filmmaker in. It's a beautiful city to struggle because for 5,000 rupees I can find a house, I can live a life. Here in Mumbai, you cannot have those 5 years of incubation as a filmmaker to write your script, to assist somebody. You know what I mean? So I think this is where, to answer this question, this is where the industry, the government, has to come forward. Today, we have a small, happy thing that's happening. You see, even in Hindi movies, right? You see more desi, authentic stories slowly being told in Hindi cinema, right? Because we also have casting groups that go out to Delhi and all other places like, But we don't have studios reaching out to writers in small towns, to directors in small towns. We should reach out. An open door policy does not mean, and this is Ed Catmull who says in Creativity Inc., the Pixar book, that an open door policy doesn't mean my door is open and I'm sitting inside there. As a leader, you have to go open doors of your subordinates, you open them every day and every day ask them, do you have a problem? That's your job. That's why you're getting those millions of dollars, yeah. So we should go out to these cities and this is where the culture is, this is where the passion is, and empower those guys. You know what I mean? Instead of saying that I'm in Bombay, you come and meet me. I can't even afford your flight ticket, I'm sorry. I can't come to Bombay. Like when Netflix or Amazon starts their offices, they started in BKC. Why? As a filmmaker, I'm allowed to ask such stupid questions. I'm sure Vivek will have very good reasons why, but as a director, I'm allowed to ask certain controversial questions like this, so I'm taking the liberty with you. But I feel that if you understand the spirit of what I'm trying to say, that the studios, the monies basically, right, should be spread out. We should reach out to every B town, every small town, have a small little place there to have writers' rooms and incubate. And let them write in their regional languages. They should not, why are you asking for a submission in English? You know, a humor show which was presented to me, supposedly as a director I'm reading a script, that show, that script is written in English. It is for a Hindi show or a Tamil show. Why? Because the guys in Bombay, they have to read. So what this does is, you are trying to, kind of restrict the movie making to a small percentage who knows English, who can afford to live in Bombay, and who are close to you, and they can come. You know, I think this is the problem why we are not empowering. We will have 10 more Rajamoulis. We will have 20 more Kantaras. You know, there'll be so many more people coming out, and it'll be a great business too. It will be a great business. So I think that kind of thought process in the money side of things also, that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, I need to reach out to my family of filmmakers in India, because that's what the West, so Korea does that beautifully, Japan does that beautifully. So I think we are still in that colonial mindset that if a guy doesn't speak English, he doesn't know his job. You know, so that has to go from our DNA. It'll take time, but it's high time we do that.
बहुत सही बोले आपने, एकदम perfect. बहुत सही बोला. Moving away from English slightly.
Can I just add one thing
Sure,
to what he said? I think that's a fantastic answer, and I completely agree. But just one thing to, I think also the West, because it's such a big market, so we keep saying, when will the West accept? Why do we want them to accept? We have to think about that. But the answer is, from pure commercial perspective, you want to get a larger audience, so let's understand that's why we want it in the first place, not for any other reason. But also, I find that there is a sort of binary mindset that after living in America for 6 years, I can tell you, that things don't translate. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's he's one of the business reporters covering India for I won't say which organization, and we're talking about one of the Hinduja family talk that's happening. It's in the news, I can say. And he says, "Boss, what is this philosophy? It says all the wealth is owned by everyone and no one." Now, as an Indian, it makes complete sense to me about what they're trying to say and achieve with that one sentence. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Hinduja families openly, they very often say this, that all the assets and the shareholding, the wealth of the Hinduja group will be owned by everyone and no one. That's something, I'm just phrasing it wrong. But I'm sure Swamiji knows completely what they're trying to achieve by saying that. And it's a very profound thing. But we are, in that news organization, we're laughing stock when they read that sentence out loud. Because they haven't made the effort of coming to, how will they? It's a beat for 2 years. But this takes if you grow up in this culture, you understand what that kind of, what that means. And I'm saying one thing, passing, but it comes in very many ways. I had an opportunity of interviewing Bill Gates in his last visit here. He was delivering an Anant Goenka lecture. I had a lovely conversation with him, and it was great fun. But I asked him, I said, look, the way the West has lived, how does the West come and teach us about being environmentally conscious and and fighting climate change? Right? How, what makes you think that? How much have you thought about learning from how India lives? And the answer I got, and I didn't push him there at the time, but the answer I got was, the answer to solving global climate change isn't to live in poverty. That's the answer I got. I didn't want to push him at that point. I couldn't actually. I would have liked to. But the question I wanted to say was, tell me any Hollywood superstar the size of Salman Khan who lives in the same flat with his family. What is Salman Khan's carbon footprint compared to John Travolta, Tom Cruise, anybody anybody of a similar size. So I'm saying it's not poverty, it's not a binary. But what translation nahi ho raha hai? They're not able to quite, grasp India or try to understand how we're different. That's also at the...
for us.
Yeah.
Just to,
Yeah.
sorry, because one thought which you said, see, it's very interesting, Anand, that when a Berlinale or a Busan Film Festival, when they invite filmmakers from India, right, they choose very local films. And they honor you, yeah. I saw a Marathi filmmaker, so the so-called Firangs that we talk about, they want localized flavor to play in their film festival, because only then it's exotic for them, it's new, right? They want world building. But what happens when we are just new to it? Maybe 10 years is when the corporate studios ecosystem has evolved, and it's still evolving. What happens is when I am having to work second guessing what, I'm a Desi, and I'm second guessing what my Firang boss will want to see, I think that is a problem. It is not a personal, it is a mindset, right? But when the Firang or whatever, when he or she takes over, they are able to cut through it, because they're not second guessing, they just go make what they like, right? So I think this is a great opportunity for us to kind of create our own studio systems, our own studio models, right? Because what was happening in the past was working beautifully for India. Like independent producers, they take the money and they put it, right? But now, the greatness about corporates is that we can expand it at some other level. So I look forward to the corporates to supercharge this process, but to make a certain desi, like you added paneer to pizza to sell it here. That's what we need to do,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do we have time for one last question? Okay. It's an interesting question about social media, since you oversee new media as well. One of the key things that we've seen now is that obviously digital and social media is very, very useful, extremely makes us a smarter society, but at the same time it's used to spread misinformation and fear and create divisiveness globally. How can media platforms leverage their technologies to promote positive interactions and dialogues amongst individuals from diverse backgrounds to basically foster mutual understanding and counter this misinformation and divisive narrative?
I think the fact is that today we're all a victim of the algorithm. We don't really know why we're consuming what we consume on our phones. You open up Instagram, which is, I think, considered the best algorithm in the world, even better than TikTok. Instagram is considered the best. When you say best, meaning it is instinctively the most sticky algorithm. So when you open up Instagram, you struggle to stop. If you study that, if you study the user behavior on Instagram, you have no idea why you're saying yes or no, or why you're scrolling up, or why you're continuing to watch a particular reel or a particular post. You have no clue about why that is. So, when you said social media makes us smarter, also, I wasn't sure that the jury's out on that. I think, we are all becoming very aware that when I'm having a conversation with you right now about, Berlin Film Festival, if I say it 10 times, when I open on Instagram now on my phone, I'm going to get posts about Berlin Film Festival. I think this is becoming something where audiences are getting very aware. I think in India we have a long way to go because it's still a very new medium. And it's not second nature to us to be consuming social media as much as it is in the West. But I think, this has to come from the audiences. They have to understand that they don't want to be the monkey that the algorithm is controlling, but they want to make proactive choices about what content they want to consume. And it's a journey. I don't think we're there. I think there's a lot of media education. There's a lot of just awareness that I think that is. I think we're all investing time and effort in it, but I think it's a journey. And the short answer is, everybody, please just follow Indian Express on your social media.
Just a corollary to that, there's a question which I'd like to just take as the last question from Vidhu, who's in the audience. He's saying in Singapore, Straits Times never runs a negative news on first few pages of newspaper. But in India, the first few pages always have negative news, which is highlighted in print media. What can media do to give more positive and value-based news in the first few pages of the print and newspaper?
Yeah, I think this is a complaint I get very often, but I will fall on my on Prasanna's guidance when he said that if Navika Kumar was just putting nice images of India and chirpy stuff, nobody will be watching. I think it's true. We don't like it, but the truth is, and this is an old thing. Fear sells. And I'm not saying that we have to therefore buy into or give into the fear. But I think that, what we do in a newspaper, I think we won't be doing our job if we are not calling out injustices, if we are not calling out where something, I think, needs to be called out. There was an attack on an army convoy 3 days ago. It was the front page news. It was not a pleasant sight to wake up to. It certainly wasn't. And maybe it isn't a good business to put that on the front page. Maybe a better business to put on the front page would be to put the African kid playing the guitar. Maybe, maybe I would have had more engagement on the newspaper if that was the front page. But we're failing in our job if we don't do that. The reason newspapers, I'm making newspapers versus the Indian Express news brand on social media. The Indian Express newspaper, the reason people read it today is because there's somebody telling you what you should be reading. And the editor is telling you should know that so many army jawans died in a terrorist attack 3 days ago. And that is the biggest news of the day because we have lost people who are fighting for our country. So that, that curation is something that we do for you. And, it's one of the reasons that I think Express doesn't sell as much as Times, because Times doesn't, Times is a much more easy read, and I respect them for understanding that is what audiences want. But I think that's what we are. We are a hard-hitting newspaper. We make you, we force you to pay attention to things that are uncomfortable.
Thank you. With that, we come to the end of this discussion. I know there are lots of questions out there, but we probably don't have the time, some other time. So, just want to say that, media and entertainment does have the power to influence. And with that power, hopefully we can kind of fulfill the vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you very much.